The war in the Middle East widening this Tuesday night. Where it leaves the people of Iran, the mixed messaging about why the U.S. president launched the attacks.
We were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first.
How he's taking aim at some European allies for their lack of support.
The UK has been very, very uncooperative.
Plus, how the war could affect your wallet beyond oil and gas prices.
We're kind of entering an unprecedented era.
The advice to everyday investors.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Trump administration says the war the U.S. and Israel launched against Iran is going to intensify. And though the U.S. claims to have killed much of Iran's leadership, the country continues to fight back, hitting its neighbors in the Persian Gulf with missiles and drones, including the U.S. consulate in Dubai. In Iran, hundreds of sites have been hit. Iran's Red Crescent says 787 people have been killed, including senior leaders who were meeting today to choose Iran's next supreme leader. The White House now says regime change is not an explicit aim of this war, though it is killing any potential successors.
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group. They may be dead also, based on reports. So I guess you have a third wave coming in. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody.
President Trump is also rejecting suggestions made by his Secretary of State yesterday that Israel forced his hand to attack Iran.
The president had already made a decision to act on the timing. The president acted on the timing that gave us the highest chance of success.
Though on the second day of this war, Israel's prime minister made it clear that the U.S. is helping him fulfill a long-held dream. This combination of forces enables us to do what I have long hoped to do for 40 years, Benjamin Netanyahu said, to strike the terror regime decisively. Our coverage of this expanding war begins with Jeff Semple, who is in Istanbul tonight, and a warning some of the images are disturbing.
The war in the Middle East is escalating and expanding by the hour. This, the latest front line in Lebanon, after Hezbollah launched rockets into Israel on Monday. The Israelis hit back, targeting the Lebanese militant group's command centers in Beirut. Israel also ordered its ground troops into Lebanon to take up what it called a defensive posture. Their fragile ceasefire from 2024 now up in smoke. Meanwhile, parts of Tehran are starting to look reminiscent of Gaza City, pounded into rubble by relentless Israeli and American airstrikes.
They have no Navy, it's been knocked out. They have no Air Force, it's been knocked out. Just about everything's been knocked out.
But despite the president's claims of disarming Tehran, the regime is escalating its own offensive, striking not only Israel, but 9 other countries across the region, targeting their American bases, embassies, as well as oil refineries and energy infrastructure. Saudi Arabia threatened to hit back, while Oman pleaded for Trump to de-escalate.
They're widening this way beyond Israel now, and they're punishing firmly and driving wedges between the U.S. allies in the region.
This international security expert says history offers hard lessons for the Trump administration.
For over 100 years, states have been trying to topple regimes with air power alone, and it has never worked.
Trump has now stopped talking about regime change. He appeared to dismiss the idea of partnering with Iran's pro-democracy leader Reza Pahlavi.
Some people like him, and we haven't been thinking about too much about that. It would seem to me that somebody from within maybe would be more appropriate.
He was very much hoping for a Venezuela-style operation, that he could sort of impose his will on the Iranians. That hasn't happened, and it likely won't happen.
And I guess where does all of this leave the people of Iran, do you think?
They're the biggest losers.
Already, aid groups say the civilian death toll in Iran is well into the hundreds. Iranian state TV broadcasting these images. The aftermath of what it says was a strike on a girls' school that killed more than 150 children and staff. Global News can't verify those claims, and Israel says it wasn't aware of a strike in that area. But the grief is hard to deny. The White House released a statement late today, once again seeking to clarify the objectives of Operation Epic Fury, which basically involves destroying the regime, its military, and its nuclear program. Donna?
Jeff Semple in Istanbul, Turkey, thank you. 4 of the 6 U.S. service members killed in the war have been identified. They are 4 reservists based in Iowa, the youngest just 20 years old. The Trump administration has not sought authorization from Congress for this war. And as Jackson Proskow reports, lawmakers are asking pointed questions.
I thought we were going to have a situation where we were going to be attacked.
Without new evidence, U.S. President Donald Trump offered fresh justification for striking Iran.
Iran would have had a very powerful nuclear weapon within 1 month.
Those claims contradict international experts and Trump's own Secretary of State, who suggested the real risk was that Israel would strike Iran first.
We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces.
So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand. But Israel was ready and we were ready.
The consequences of Trump's decision are now rippling throughout the Middle East. The U.S. Embassy in Riyadh was hit by Iranian drones overnight. So was the U.S. consulate in Dubai. The U.S. has closed its embassies in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon, told non-essential staff to leave 6 nations in total, and urged all American citizens to depart 14 countries in the region immediately. Most flights are canceled. The U.S. is arranging charters. The embassy in Jerusalem warned it is not in a position to evacuate or directly assist Americans.
They do not have the capacity to be able to help U.S. citizens.
Among the stranded in Dubai, retired Major General Randy Manner, who served as Deputy Commanding General for the U.S. Army in the Middle East and is now caught in the middle of a new American-led conflict.
As a senior military officer, I do not understand the purpose.
Like many Americans, Manner has a lot of questions about the ever-shifting explanations for this war.
They want to stop drone manufacturing. They want to reduce the stockpile of Iranian weapons. They want to do regime change. It's like, where did this all come from? And that sounds a little bit unusual from a military perspective, where we're used to clarity on what our objectives are to define success.
Back in Washington, lawmakers were briefed on the administration's rationale and apparent goals. That did little to answer the key questions so many have.
The American people do not want an endless war. The administration doesn't seem to know what it's doing. Every hour there's a different rationale as to why we're doing this.
Jackson, President Trump promised to end wars, not start them. What are the early signs of how the American people are reacting to this?
Well, Donna, 6 in 10 Americans say they disapprove of the military action, and we're only a few days in. Only 27% of Americans think that the U.S. actually made enough effort at diplomacy here, and the vast majority of both Democrats and independents doubt that President Trump has a strategy. And now that skepticism is starting to be felt within Trump's own circles. A number of high-profile figures in MAGA world, from Tucker Carlson to former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, are objecting to the war. And Donna, they're basically questioning how this serves American interests.
Okay, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. Canada's Prime Minister, who is on a trade mission to Australia, has made his first public comments in several days, including about the war in the Middle East. Until now, all he'd done is put out a statement supporting the U.S. action. Today, he added more detail to that. Mackenzie Gray is traveling with the Prime Minister.
Mark Carney has shifted the Canadian position on military action in Iran again, Donna. Originally, he was strongly in support of the bombing, but now he's attempting to take a more nuanced approach.
Canada was not asked to participate. You know that. We were not informed in advance. We were not asked to participate. Prima facie, it appears that these actions are inconsistent with international law.
This is the first time anyone from the Canadian government has suggested what the U.S. and Israel has done could be illegal. And even with that concern, Carney is still supportive of the actions, listing Iran's nuclear program and the regime's murders of its own and Canadian citizens as rationale. Unlike the defense minister, Carney did not call for a ceasefire, instead saying the U.S. and Israel must follow international law and that Iran needs to stop bombing civilian infrastructure in other Middle Eastern countries.
Canada is taking the world as it is, not passively waiting for a world we wish to be. We do, however, take this position with regret because the current conflict is another example of the failure of the international order.
This was Carney's first press conference since leaving Ottawa 7 days ago, and since his meeting with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Carney distanced himself from a senior government official that told reporters before the trip that the Indian government has not continued their involvement in extortions, murders, and violence in Canada, saying he wouldn't have used those words.
I will tell you that there is progress on these issues, and that progress is a product, in my judgment, it's a product of the resources we're putting in. It's a product of the clarity of our position.
The RCMP and CSIS have stated the Indian government has been involved in murders and extortions in Canada. The latter, Carney said, he raised with Modi as well as transnational repression. But he wouldn't discuss if the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar was raised, Donna. That's who the Trudeau government accused of being murdered by agents of the Indian government.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Sydney, Australia, thank you. This war is testing relationships among traditional allies, many of whom are concerned about the consequences of the attacks on Iran. Today, President Trump sharply criticized Spain and the UK for not allowing the U.S. military to use those countries' bases in the region. Redmond Shannon reports.
The Cypriot village of Akrotiri evacuated a day after an Iranian drone hit the nearby British Air Force base.
The strike on RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus was not in response to any decision that we have taken.
Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer had said he would not get involved in the war and would not allow the US to use British bases to attack Iran. Since the drone attack, Starmer has walked back on that partially, now allowing the US to use 2 bases, but only for missions that target Iranian missile sites. For US President Donald Trump, it's too little, too late.
UK has been very, very uncooperative.
As Trump praised German Chancellor Friedrich Merz for his logistical help, he tore into the British leader.
It would have been much more convenient landing there as opposed to flying many extra hours. So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with. He's a tough negotiator.
It's a far cry from Trump's jovial state visit last year. Spain, like the UK, joined the calamitous US invasion of Iraq 23 years ago. But Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says this war is illegal and has also blocked the use of air bases.
So we're going to cut off all trade with Spain. We don't want anything to do with Spain.
The two nations' trade amounts to $47 billion US. After an Iranian drone attack on a French base in the United Arab Emirates, the French president is following Starmer by sending a warship to the region.
De graves conséquences pour la paix et la sécurité de tous.
Emmanuel Macron is also calling the war illegal, but is finding himself dragged into it nonetheless. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
The International Monetary Fund is warning the war with Iran could darken the global economy if it drags on for long. European markets fell sharply today, and the Dow Jones, S&P and Nasdaq fell too as investors move away from riskier assets. And Gaviola looks at what a prolonged conflict could mean for consumers and investors.
A price bump at the pumps with more in store.
Go and fill up your tank today because for sure in the next couple of weeks we're going to see a little bit of an increase in gas prices.
There are a myriad of ways the conflict and upheaval in the Middle East and the war with Iran can impact your wallet.
We're kind of entering an unprecedented era, much larger, in my opinion, than what we saw in the Ukraine-Russia crisis.
Starting with the price of oil and gas, even though Canadians get the bulk of their energy products domestically or from the U.S.
Very, very little comes from the Middle East for us, but it's still going to have an impact because it is a global market.
Budget more to fill up your tank or heat your home, or find ways to conserve.
Just turning your thermostat down a couple of degrees, keeping it at that sort of eco-friendly sort of 15, 16 degrees, and then bumping it back up to where you're more comfortable when you get home.
But economists say the inflationary impact goes well beyond oil and gas.
If the cost of that trucking gets more expensive, then that is going to be reflected in higher prices, whether it be at the grocery store or in your restaurant bill or when you buy some products to do a DIY project this spring.
Prolonged inflation creates a conundrum for the central bank, with big implications for variable rate debt, including mortgages.
A rate hike could be back on the table, say, in the summer, maybe later into early fall. And that could mean that your mortgage, your line of credit, all of that gets more expensive if it's tied to the floating rate.
And few investment portfolios aren't affected by these geopolitical shocks.
This is a time to stay the course and continue contributing to your RSP, contributing to your TFSA, doing those monthly contributions rather than trying to time the market.
It seems the best course for most everyday investors is to keep up with the news without taking drastic financial action. Donna? Okay, and Gaviola in Toronto, thank you. Toronto police are investigating an incident at a synagogue last night. Police say gunshots were fired and there's extensive damage to the building, but no one was injured. The shooting happened shortly after the congregation wrapped up a service to mark the Jewish holiday of Purim. Police say they are now patrolling the area. Stranded in the Middle East, coming up, the Canadians hoping the federal government will help get them home. Iran's women's soccer team stayed silent as their country's national anthem played before the opening match at the Asian Cup in Australia. The coaches and team declined to make any statements about the war and the death of Iran's supreme leader. They are the only team from the Middle East that qualified for this tournament, and they arrived several days before the airstrikes began. Some Canadian travelers stuck in the Middle East are growing more frustrated with what they say is a lack of help from the Canadian government. The war makes flying dangerous, and airspace across much of the region is closed. Commercial flights are making long diversions, and more than 12,000 flights to Dubai and other busy international hubs have been canceled. A few countries have organized evacuation flights for their citizens. Heidi Petracek looks at the limited options Canadians have to get home.
Tourists landing at home relieved after being stranded in the Middle East. This German evacuation flight through the Emirates airline arrived in Frankfurt from Dubai Tuesday. 2 French evacuation flights will land in Paris Tuesday night, and the U.S. is also looking at charter planes and military flights to bring back 1,500 Americans.
You know, Emirates is flying, Fly Dubai is flying, but no Canadian Airlines.
Leaving Eve Noga and her husband frustrated. They were supposed to come home Tuesday morning from their Dubai vacation. Now they're trying to get out and say Ottawa isn't doing enough to help.
We get emails just saying, do not rely on the Canadian government to get you out. Find a commercial option. Well, there are no commercial options for Canadians.
The limited commercial flights leaving Dubai are with Gulf and European carriers, and it's a trickle compared to the thousands of flights canceled after Saturday's strikes on Iran.
I came to a mall which has a Emirates airline ticketing office, and I was there for the last 3-4 hours.
Omar Khan had no luck trying to get from Dubai to Ontario. He says other than advising Canadians to leave when they can, there's been little guidance from the federal government.
So they should definitely do more.
In Doha, Qatar, airspace remains closed, so there are few alternatives.
Rescue here is going to be very, very difficult. Maybe overland, I don't know.
A Slovakian military plane flew 100 citizens the more than 3,000 kilometers from Jordan. For Canadians, the distance to get home is much farther, more than 10,000 kilometers.
Our top priority right now is the 100,000 Canadians that are in the region.
At an event in Toronto, the Foreign Affairs Minister said she has asked Oman about the potential use of its airspace, but said little else.
I requested use of that airspace if necessary.
We had an airstrike not even an hour ago.
Noga just wants to get away from the widening crisis in the Middle East. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Ahead, what an inquest into BC's mass shooting hopes to achieve. BC's chief coroner has called an inquest into the deadly shootings in Tumbler Ridge. 8 people, including 5 children, were killed before the shooter took their own life at the town's high school. The chief coroner says the inquest will serve as a transparent and independent forum to examine the circumstances that led to the shootings and make recommendations aimed at preventing future shootings.
A key area of examination will be how individuals in crisis are identified and supported, including access to mental health supports and services in rural and remote and small communities across British Columbia, such as crisis intervention and wraparound supports.
Details on when and where the inquest will be held will be announced once the police investigation is finished. In the U.S., the father of a teenager accused of a deadly school shooting in Georgia has been found guilty. It took a jury less than 3 hours to find 55-year-old Colin Gray guilty on 27 charges, including second-degree murder and cruelty to children. Gray gave his son Colt an AR-15 rifle for Christmas. Colt Gray is accused of using that gun to kill 4 of his classmates in September 2024. He was 14 at the time and remains in custody. His trial date has not been set. Spring forward for the last time. Next, the reaction as BC ditches seasonal time change. It is that time of the year again. On Sunday, the clocks spring forward for most Canadians. Daylight saving is observed everywhere in Canada except Saskatchewan and Yukon. And soon BC is ditching it too. Heather Yurix West explains why it's happening and looks at whether other provinces are likely to follow suit.
One more time. With kids and clocks dancing to One More Time, BC's Premier says this weekend's time change will be its last.
I'm here to announce that we are done waiting.
I hate this time change. My body doesn't like it. My animals don't like it.
How hard is it with young kids?
So tough. They don't get having to wake up early or stay up late. Super frustrating.
Here in Alberta, the question of whether to ditch the time change was narrowly defeated in a referendum back in 2021. But now that both neighboring BC and Saskatchewan are embracing one permanent time, Alberta's government says the issue is worth revisiting.
I know there was a little issue the last time we asked the question. Albertans really wanted to understand which time we were going to change to and why. So I think we'll have to have that conversation and really go through the rationale, but it's probably coming toward us.
Here's what the science actually says. The worst thing we can do is to keep switching twice a year. And if we're going to pick one time and stay there, the medical consensus is clear.
Research has found the maximum health and safety benefits come when places stick to permanent standard time. That's what Saskatchewan and Yukon have done. But BC is opting for permanent daylight saving time instead.
For me, there's a whole bunch of opinions out there. I just want us to focus on healthcare and the cost of living.
No other province has plans to end their twice-a-year time change, though Ontario passed a law in 2020 saying it would if Quebec and New York did too. BC had planned to wait for the West Coast U.S. states before adopting permanent time, but they're not waiting anymore. Heather Yurix West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Quebec City. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to globalnational@globalnews.ca. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.